Vito and Michael Corleone. The personification of power, wealth and intelligence. Two of the most iconic characters in film history, brilliantly played by two of the greatest actors of all time, Marlon Brando and Al Pacino. These characters are the epitome of what having an extraordinary amount of power actually looks like. But the question always comes up, who was a better Don? And it really is a difficult question to answer subjectively, because unless you have a clear bias towards either one, you certainly can make an argument for both of them from a first glance. That's why in this video we will be extensively analyzing Don Vito and Michael, comparing them through some key categories, that by the end gives us a superior and more logical answer to this question. Before we start, keep in mind who you think is the ultimate Godfather. So let's begin. So who is Vito Corleone? Don Vito Corleone was the founder and the patriarch of the Corleone crime family. Vito came to America as an orphan and slowly clawed his way up to be one of the most powerful and revered individuals of his time, and even beyond. Through his intelligence, wit and cunning he was able to reach the heights of power and wealth and pass down his legacy to his son. Vito was the epitome of what a powerful leader is. He is the representation of what, and how men of extreme power are able to strive and pull the strings of influence. But what differentiated Vito from other powerful individuals is that he had a very strict code of honor that he would never break. He set limits to how far he would go depending on the scenario. This is not saying that he was a peaceful man, free of any sense of ruthlessness, but that he did place limits on how far he would go depending on the situation. The youngest son of Vito Corleone, Michael Corleone, had always tried to stay away from his father's shadow and wanted nothing to do with the family business. Michael was very intelligent, he inherited most of Vito's strengths, and with his education and military experience, he really was on par, and some would argue, an even better Don than his father. Michael started off as a very moral man, always looking down upon what his family was involved in. But after the series of events we see in the films, Michael begins to understand his father's philosophy, and begins to transform into becoming just as ruthless as Vito, sometimes even going past what Vito deemed to be too far. But as a Don, Michael almost made every right move possible, allowing him to carry the family and ensuring its survival. A formidable strength both men had was possessing a strong sense of acumen, wit and just overall intelligence in all aspects of the word. Vito had the edge in being street smart, but Michael's innate ability to always be thinking 10 moves ahead made him just as menacing as his father. Michael went from a college student to a decorated soldier to the Don of one of the most powerful families New York had ever seen, all in just a few years is simply incredible. He outsmarted all his enemies, setting up various traps, then completely wiping all of them out. Vito did possess a unique ability to read people that was unmatched by anyone of his time. However, there doesn't really seem to be a clear winner in this aspect. Being the head of a mafia family, it is imperative for the Don to have control, but more importantly have the utmost loyalty from his soldiers. He must ensure that his men are willingly prepared to do whatever is asked of them. They should both fear and respect their Don enough that they will fight for him, putting their lives in danger for him, and believing in the vision he sets out. Michael and Vito both had two very distinct leadership styles. Vito took a more personal approach, engaging with subordinates as a friend, while still having them know who is really in charge, but in a way that he made them really believe they would rather have him as a friend than an enemy. He was not shy of straightening out anyone who opposed his leadership. He still had his consiglieri and capos manage most of the day-to-day tasks, and mostly relaying orders through them, never directly giving them orders, but when he interacted with anyone, he did it in his unique style that we saw in the films. Michael, on the other hand, treated his men as assets.
You see, all our people are businessmen. Their loyalty is based on that.
Because he did not possess that natural charisma his father had, he had to very systematically manage them. He delegated most of the day-to-day street affairs to his capos, not wanting to have to deal directly with the soldiers. This method does have its strengths. It allowed Michael to have a better strategic vision over the expanding empire. Having delegated most of the mundane tasks to his underlings, he could now completely focus on the big picture stuff and work towards his vision for the future of the family. It did create this aura of power and invincibility to Michael, in that he was so far up top, that if you're not important enough, you can't even see him, therefore must just follow orders accordingly or suffer the consequences. According to the godfather of the philosophy of the Mafia, Niccolò Machiavelli, when asked whether being feared or loved is preferable, he states that ideally, a prince or leader should be both loved and feared, but this state of affairs is difficult to attain. But if forced to make a choice, it is much better to be feared than loved. This is because men, by nature, are ungrateful, fickle, dissembling, anxious to flee danger, and covetous of gain. In times of remote danger, they are willing to take risks for their prince, but if the danger is real, they turn against their prince. It is easy to break a bond of love when the situation arises, but the fear of punishment is always effective, regardless of the situation. So, the main distinction that can be made between Michael and Vito is that Vito mastered the art of being both feared and loved, while Michael primarily was just feared. Still, he wasn't hated, but couldn't master the balance between the two. Therefore, Vito wins in this category. In terms of wealth, Vito had started from absolutely nothing and built an empire worth millions, a remarkable achievement. But Michael had just as difficult a task, if not more, than what Vito had to face. Michael was thrown in as the head of the family that was in deep trouble, and not only carried it forward, but completely transformed it into a billion-dollar empire, surpassing any other mafia figure, and even becoming one of the wealthiest men in the world. But we cannot forget that without Vito none of that would have been possible. However, we will give this one to Michael. An unavoidable part of being a Don is having to show willingness for violence if need be. It's bad for business, but without it, they'll seem weak and therefore easily replaced. Also, in that world, it's sometimes the only option. If we were just to go by the films, it would seem that Michael by far was a much more brutal and ruthless Don. However, we don't think that's necessarily true, and here's why. Although we meet Vito at the height of power, Vito didn't inherit anything. He was literally given nothing, and so he had to take it, carving up an empire. What wasn't shown in too much detail was how Vito really got to his position. In part 2 we saw the very early stages of his rise to power, but what we didn't see were all the wars he had to fight, which were against much more powerful individuals. In a world as vicious as the one he was a part of, he could not be seen as weak, therefore adapted, and balancing his ruthlessness with a sense of justice. Unlike other Dons, Vito always attempted to win over someone as an ally, making them an offer they can't refuse, therefore all parties were satisfied. Which made him a great businessman in establishing his most important asset, his connections. However, at the same time, if someone refused him and insulted him, they weren't given another chance. It would either be the worst mistake they ever made or their last. In which is why he was so feared.
I worked my whole life. I don't apologize to take care of my family. And I refused to be a fool. Dancing on the string held by all those big shots.
As for Michael, we are all well aware of his ruthlessness. Michael also had to earn it. After he became the head of the family, he was perceived as weak, especially in comparison to Don Vito, who had already established himself as a ruthless, powerful Don that can't be trifled with. But after the baptism of fire, Michael was now unquestionably known just as a powerful Don as his father. Therefore, generally both did what was necessary for the family. They didn't use it unless it was absolutely necessary. However, we will give this one to Michael. This is mainly because of the Fredo incident. If we were to imagine Vito being in the place of Michael, having his only brother left betray him, almost costing his life as well as his wife's, we still can't imagine Vito having his own brother killed, because he considered family to be sacred, out of bounds, and that's where he put the limit. But Michael really had no limits. It's arguable if it was the smarter thing to do. However, it definitely was the more ruthless approach. Growing up in the rough streets of New York, more specifically in Hell's Kitchen, Vito gained his experience firsthand. He had to go through so many challenges and difficulties, a long process in which allowed him to become the Don we have come to know. Vito didn't really have any mentors or anyone guiding him on how to maneuver and survive in this criminal underworld. He dealt with all kinds of people, learning valuable lessons along the way, all that made him really comprehend the psychology that motivated people to do what they do, and how to wield it to his favor. Therefore, going through all those hardships firsthand, Vito had a better sense of how to deal with people. He finally had formulated a unique ability to cunningly influence people, and gain their respect, creating an aura of power around him that made them fear him. He had mastered the art of pulling the strings of power. As for Michael, he really learned almost everything from his father. Vito mentored and guided him after he took over as Don. So, Michael didn't have any of these experiences firsthand, rather learnt these important lessons through his father. In addition, he took over an already well-established empire, that thanks to Vito was already well-respected and feared. But unfortunately for Michael, he had to now live up to the Corleone name that was revered all around the country, as people began to think that Michael was a pushover. So he had to assert himself in the Mafia, and let them know that he too was a Corleone that couldn't be trifled with. Sure enough, Michael succeeded and became well known and respected throughout the United States and abroad, establishing the Corleone family name not only on the streets, but even on a mainstream level. Once again, this particular category will have to go to Vito, mainly because of the difficulties he faced. Building his name as a man of respect was far more challenging. Now that we analyzed both Dons and compared them in various aspects, we will now reveal who we believe was the better Godfather. Before we determine the winner, we want to know your thoughts. And now, without further ado, here is our winner. After conducting this analysis, we have clearly concluded that Don Vito Corleone is indeed the better Don. This does not take away anything from Michael. The one single reason that led us to this conclusion is the fact Vito gave everything to Michael. He schooled him on how to maneuver in a world full of deceitful criminals looking to always outthrone them. Not only did he teach him everything he had learned through his 25-year reign as Don, but gave him the infrastructure to continue building the legacy, so he basically came in and found everything ready. It wasn't an easy task, of course, as it was beginning to crumble, and Michael was brilliantly able to hold it together and even achieve feats Vito had never dreamed of achieving himself. But putting all these factors aside, Vito managed to both achieve his aspirations and hold on to the thing that to him held the most importance, which was family. While Michael attempted to accomplish the same, he did reach new heights, but lost his family along the way. There are some aspects that were out of his control that led to this, but the sad reality remains. Also, if you really look into it, Michael always knew he would never outshine his father. In fact, probably no one could. But what do you think? Let's continue the conversation in the comments. Once again, thank you for watching, and see you very soon.